So, I know there's this weird popping noise, and I'm so sorry. I'm still learning how to use my microphone on this laptop because this laptop does not actually have a microphone in it. I'm not quite sure how that works, but anyway. So, I know it's there. I'm sorry. I tried to get rid of it as much as I could. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Rambling Reality, which apparently is going to be like a 1 month episode podcast. I don't know. I haven't figured this out. Anyway, so this time I decided for Halloween to come up with something interesting. And one of my most creative endeavors in my entire life has been my imaginary best friend. And I wanted to do a little bit of research and see, what other people were doing and what psychology had said and all that kind of stuff too. But first, we're going to talk about my best friend. My best friend is probably the most awesome best friend anyone's ever heard of. Oh, by the way, pardon any bells. That's my cat. Okay, so my best friend was a shape-shifting chicken. No, really, seriously, a shape-shifting chicken. I created her in 1983, and I had never seen a shapeshifter, so I had no idea what made me come up with it. But Fifi, spelled F-I, but pronounced F-E, was my best friend. She used to live in the carpet. She used to, stomp around as an elephant. You name it, she could do it. And when I say carpet, I mean that disastrous 1970s red shag carpet. I mean primary red. Because I lived in a trailer growing up and it had been decorated back then. So I kind of had Fifi around, and I guess it was about 1.5 or 2 when I created her. And she's named after my godmother's dog, childhood dog I should say, named Fi-Fi. I know, right? But like what a 1.5 and 2-year-old hears is not necessarily what is said. So Fifi was an amazing best friend. You could not ask for a better one in my opinion. She would run with me, she would play with me, she would play under the carpet, in the carpet, she would run around. Like I said, she became like an elephant all the time because I was enamored with elephants as a child. Well, elephants, orcas, dolphins, unicorns, and dragons. I loved Fifi. And then Fifi eventually grew up when I grew up. So she became a little bit older. So she started having, a life outside of me, even though we talked about it all the time. And Fifi's husband was named, dun dun dun, Dooley Whacker. Yes, he was named after having a dick. Because when I was little, my godmother used to say that a guy's Dooley Whacker, or, something about a guy's dick. And so that just became his name, and it was short. Dooley was short. And so they had, I think she had 6 million or 9 million kids, but only 3 stayed, like in the movie Charlotte's Web, because I was old enough to love that movie. And I later read the book and loved it then, but I was too young for that at the time. And she had the 3 daughters stay, and they were named after Christopher Columbus's ships, Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. I don't know. I have no idea. This just amused me as a child, so I thought I should, I was a very interesting child. Now, I played with them from about 2 to 6. At the age of 6, I started kindergarten. Anyone that has gone to kindergarten knows it's kind of hard to keep an imaginary best friend when you have other people in your class that look at you kind of funny when you talk to Fifi. Eventually, they died. First, Dooley died. By, yes, crossing the road. He crossed the road in front of my elder godmother's home, and he didn't look both ways. And that's what happens, you go splat. I knew that. I was a pretty smart child for that. And then about 4 months later or so, Fifi died in the same way. But, like Charlotte's Web, their 3 kids stayed until I kind of forgot about them. And I used to love Fifi. Like, I don't remember playing with her that much, but I remember there are just snippets in my mind of remembering. I love the idea of imaginary best friends and imaginary companions because I think they offer a lot of creativity and outlet for kids, You hear kids playing with dolls and all kinds of stuff, and I had all kinds of dolls. I never got rid of Fifi because I had dolls. I had Mary, my pound puppy. It was actually Daisy from the original Pound Puppies run, but I named her Mary after my school bus driver, later school bus driver, but at the time just a neighbor. And I had Jessie, and Jessie was actually numbers 1 through 4. We got her at some Christmas city. I I can't remember where it was, but it was in the 1980s. And I kept leaving her behind, so we kept having to go back and get another one because I was a spoiled child and my godmothers loved to spoil me. So we had those. And they all just kind of joined the party. So that was Fifi. And I wanted to do a little bit of research and see what other people had come about and see what people had learned. And I'm a nerd, but I'm a nerd without internet access at home, so I used Google Scholar and downloaded it onto my phone, and then I downloaded it to my computer and did some interesting, observational stuff. And there was a study by Tracy R. Gleason, Racel N. Girardi, and Jonathan M. Cheek, who said in their study that participants who reported imaginary companions scored higher than those who did not on measures of imagination, including imaginary use, hostile daydreams, and vivid nightmares, and on personality scales, including dependent interpersonal styles and internal state awareness. Okay, for the record, I'm going to have a link to all these studies, and I've got a couple of them in here. Noting this one right now because I have vivid night dreams, and nightmares. I dream in color. I've dreamt in color all my life. I can remember having a nightmare when I was 10 or 11, and it was in the Looney Tunes style, but I remember waking up and having and seeing a hole in my stomach that a polar bear had eaten through. It was very strange, but that kind of vivid imagination and that kind of world is not new to me. And so it was kind of interesting to see that connection between imaginary friends and the kind of world that I lived in and how I used to see things. So kids with imaginary friends tend to create myths and world building, obviously. And typically this kind of difference levels out at around 7 compared to ones who are not, with imaginary friends who do not have that internal imagination button, I guess. Because, around 7 you start to go to school, you have more socialization and the interplay between the various experience and backgrounds, so the imaginary friend kind of, goes away. And it makes sense. And the study also notes in previous research, college-age students were more likely to believe in the paranormal or more esoteric beliefs when they, grow up a little bit, and those that with higher levels of involvement, such as hearing their companions, displayed a higher level of imaginative involvement. So higher fantasy play tends to skew more imaginative skills in social settings, which just means you're a little bit more socially adaptable. You can kind of easily slide in and out, butterfly almost. And then also within their research themselves, they found that participants with high involvement levels were more likely to engage in hostile daydreams, such as imagining taking revenge against a perceived slight. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just the young women that used to have imaginary friends used the imagery while they were processing their anger. They used it to kind of see it, feel it, and let it go. And it kind of alleviated the anxiety and stuff with it. It also indicated that participants with imaginary friends tends to move towards harmony within a hierarchy, not looking to create a fuss. So they're more, again, adaptable. They're not going to demand all the attention, and they're also not going to be completely passive. They're going to be that middle guy or that middle woman. And they appear to develop a social orientation early on that includes cooperativeness and easy interactions with adults and little aggression and play, as well as concerns regarding meeting adults' expectations, which means they're a little bit more of a people pleaser, which makes a little bit of sense because if your imaginary best friend is not real, you gotta please somebody like yourself. Introspection is also important, but not a reigning factor. Pretend play simply pushes an internal awareness of any moment-to-moment state of being. So, they're more likely to know what's going on within themselves, but it doesn't necessarily mean a deep introspection. It just means they're kind of looking around. And I think that's kind of important because, again, with in the case of Fifi, for me, I loved Fifi. Fifi was everything. And Fifi was kind of my playmate because I had playmates, but I mostly hung around, grandparent age people. So I didn't have that social interaction with little kids that I normally would have gotten if I'd been around, play groups of my age or something like that. Another study with Denham, McKinley, Couchund, and Holt examined the emotional responses of preschool-aged kids, the typical age for imaginary companions. And while the study doesn't overly indicate the use of imaginary friends, Research indicated that high imaginative skills help navigate the social parameters within a group. Social adaptability. And it kind of creates those soft skills that, people downplay, especially for women, but they're very vital in your day-to-day interactions and how you communicate within a social setting. Not just a group of friends, but just in social settings, like even going to the marketplace or getting your tires fixed or going to work, basic skill sets. And Francisco Pons, Paul L. Harris, and Pierre-Andre Dodin note that emotional reads are possible for non-neurotypical thinkers. And I'm pointing this out because it's not necessarily an innate skill. So that emotional reads and an emotional availability and that emotional intelligence is not necessarily coming from someone that has a high imagination. It's something that it's part that and part learned. They also noticed that children who talk less about their emotional responses at 2 to 3 ages continue that trend on the next stage of development, when they're about 6 or 7, somewhere around there. And expressive children are able to read emotional cues and responses based on external criteria. The study was based in England for a very short and very small, I think it was about 30 kids. Many similar studies kind of indicated a common thread of how we interplay and stuff like that. So imaginary friends, people kind of mock kids when they have them, but they're actually really important in establishing boundaries and what they want to talk about, what they like. It kind of allows children to play. That kind of feeds into things that we see in pop culture all the time. Doctor Who had Amelia Pond, not Amy Pond, but the younger Amelia Pond, who saw the Raggedy Man and thought he was like her imaginary friend because no one else could see him. When he showed up at her wedding, he was like, "Hi, I'm real." Amy was not wrong. I'm very real, I'm very valid, and she was correct. And I think that's important too, because a lot of times we don't validate kids that have imaginary best friends, which is kind of silly and stupid in my opinion, because imaginary friends offer kids the ability to have that directed emotional state. And in the case of like the young women who were able to direct their anger, it kind of creates a way of like siphoning off, because kids are so aware of what's going on. Even if they don't understand what's going on, they're aware of the emotional state of the people around them, because that's the one thing they can read no matter what when they're kids. And I think that's a really important aspect to kind of allow them to keep having. And of course you have Puff the Magic Dragon, Pete's Dragon, who, again, which was suggested by Sven, who has a clip coming at the end of this. Pete's Dragon was not fake. It wasn't like an imaginary friend, but it kind of encompassed that. It had that same feeling, that same reality of no one else can see it. No one else knows it's there until the dragon shows up. And of course, we all know Puff the Magic Dragon and stuff like that. But the one that means the most to me is Disney's Figment. So when I was little in the 80s, Figment was everywhere at Disney World. I loved Figment. And then they made him go away for like 20 something years. I was very displeased as a Disney person, because I grew up going to Disney World all the time, because it was a place that my godmother could take me at the age of 3 and 4 years old and keep me occupied for long periods of time. And she was in her 50s and her mother was like in her 70s at the time. So it kind of offered a space for us to kind of bond and keep an eye on me. In theory. In practice, I just ran off whenever I wanted. I was a very, very willful child. But Figment was very important to me because he was like a dragon I could buy. And it wasn't like Maleficent, who I love. Do not get me wrong. And I loved the adaptation in Enchanted. But Figment was very much a part of my childhood. So I was really glad to see them bring him back. Other cases include that very short-lived show on Sci-Fi called Happy, which was like the most adult, fucked up version of an imaginary friend ever, because this little girl gets kidnapped and Happy, this imaginary unicorn, like goes from person to person trying to get help, and the only person that sees it is Christopher Maloney, Elliot Stabler from SVU. Like, he's the only one that can see him, and he's like a corrupt cop, and it was just a weird show. I got through like the first episode and never went back. But I'm bringing it up because it's kind of like interesting how it shows how adults do not see the imaginary friends anymore. And that kind of plays back into 1991's Drop Dead Fred. Anybody remember that? That was a seriously screwed up movie, but I loved it when I was a preteen. It's where the protagonist's mom, Elizabeth, her mom locks Fred, drop dead Fred, who is, Elizabeth's imaginary friend, and a Jack-in-the-Box, and keeps him locked away for 20 years or something? This huge amount of time. And then when Elizabeth is going through a divorce and going through all this emotional turmoil, she moves back home and she opens the box and Fred appears again. And he acts as like a line of childhood for Elizabeth because she's so serious and she's so doing so much, and so it's a lot of adult themes for her. And so it's interesting to watch her kind of move from this very passive to this very emotionally there person. Someone who is not scared to be who she is. That would be Sunny, sorry. Not Lobo, different cat. 2 bells, same cat, both sleeping on my bed because it's cold, sorry. But, Fred teaches her it's okay not to be passive. You can stand up for yourself. You can say what you need to say. You can be who you were as a kid. You can be just as aware, but still keep that strength. And it's okay to have the wrong reactions. It's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to not be perfect kid. And I think that really is relevant because a lot of times we expect kids to be perfect. We expect them to have the perfect reactions. And then that to transition to be the perfect adult who, never screws up, never does anything wrong, anything like that. And I think that it's kind of a jacked up thing. And then my favorite scene in that entire movie is when you see Fred in the psychiatrist's office with Elizabeth and all the other imaginary friends with their little kid. And you see Fred talking to his friends or whatever, but from Elizabeth's perspective, all you see is Fred talking to air. Because you couldn't see each other's best friends or their imaginary friends because it's a personal manifestation. It's not someone else's. And I think that's a pretty good viewpoint of an imaginary friend. Even though the movie was panned highly, and somewhat rightfully so, because it's not the best movie, it just amused me. Because I was a very, again, strange child. It definitely seemed relevant to the topic. Other shows and episodes include The Nanny, when Grace was transitioning out of grief from when her mother died and Fran moved in. There's that period where her imaginary friend is no longer needed because she's got that mother figure back and that ability to have someone close by. All these things that she was missing because all she had was her older sister. So it's very interesting to see that connection. And when she dies, they have a burial. They properly give her that closure that she didn't necessarily get when her mom died because she was so little. And I think that that's a really cool way of looking at it. And then, of course, there's many of them, but my final one of note is Foster's Home of Imaginary Friends, which was a place where old abandoned imaginary friends could find new kids to connect with, almost like a dating app. It's kind of like as the original ones transition, their best friends are going away, but they're going to need somebody, so why not find a home for them? Why not find a place for them? Because everybody should be wanted and needed. And I think that's a really strong message for kids. You can transition out, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be forgotten. And it's from the same guy that did the Powerpuff Girls. This was more my brother's generation than mine because I was born in 81, he was born in 90. He was much more into his area of, Foster and the big blue guy and all that. I vaguely remember watching it when he was a kid, but it seemed to be an important element. And now we're going to hear about Sven's imaginary friends because I didn't think anybody would want to hear me blah 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 all day long. So he volunteered because, well, that's what fiancés do. Talk about his imaginary friends and what they meant to him and, open up a little bit, which I'm glad he did. So we're going to listen to him now.
Hi, it's just me again, little Sven. I'm doing a little guest spot on here because, as the case happens, when I was very, very little, I had some imaginary friends of my own. First, a little bit of setup. When I was very little, there were more children than rooms in the house, so I was sharing the bedroom with my parents. And in their bedroom, they had those big cabinets with mirrored doors, full-length mirrors. And at some point, I noticed that if you open the doors just right, you have infinite reflections of yourself to your left and to your right. So what I did as a little kid was to imagine that those reflections are not actually reflections of me, but disguised aliens from space. And they were my friends, of course. What they wanted to do was to learn about Earth, at least as far as I can remember. And I would tell them about how everything in the world worked. I think that was a way for me to work through my experiences, learning about the world myself, to say things out loud and review them and try to figure out the world for my very little self. I don't even remember how old I was when I had those imaginary friends, or when I stopped having them, but I know it must have been, I think, well before I hit school. And I think they turned out to be a very useful tool for me to conceptualize and compartmentalize the world as I saw it at the time. And as such, I think it was actually pretty helpful and a good thing for a kid. That's who my imaginary friends were, my friends in the mirror.
Okay, so usually I do a featured podcast at the end of every episode, right? But I'm going to do things a little bit different on this one. So instead of doing one podcast, I'm going to do about 5 different podcasts and an episode of each, or 2 depending on what it is, where we talk about different things. And so you can talk about them and you can see kind of like where my interests lie. It's not necessarily with imaginary friends, but it's very Halloween-y, and some of them can seem somewhat to be imaginary friends or that companion and that mental landscape world building. So, first is One Person's Trash is Our Treasure, which is on Twitter at OPIOT, Opiot. And the episode that I'm going to mention is Don't Try to Kill 7-Year-Olds If You're a Good Person. What is it featuring? My favorite movie by Hallmark ever, and that is 10th Kingdom. Oh my god, I love 10th Kingdom. I could probably wax poetic on this thing for like another 10 hours, but I'm not going to, which is as long as the show, so that makes sense. But I think it's, one of the best adaptations of real and magical realms clashing all at once. And I'm a sucker with anything with wolves in it, or wolf in this case. And anyone that's listened to Deconstructing Damsels this month knows that, because all 3 of my episodes have featured werewolf, shifters, that kind of thing. But my interest in Wolf specifically is the fact that I think he was a very gray area, kind of a good anti-hero. And I think it really worked with her. I think his optimism and his kind of energy worked very well against her, quiet, more cynical aspect. I think it really worked together. So don't say no to that. Seriously, best episodes ever. And then the other one I'm going to recommend for another one is The Feminist Critique, which is at Feminist Critique without the E. And it's on Hocus Pocus. Like, the best Halloween movie. Like, actual Halloween movie ever. Like, no, Gremlins does not count. Gremlins is a Christmas movie. Just saying. So is Gremlins 2. I don't care what anybody says. They're the same thing. The Feminist Critique just released the Hocus Pocus episode. They just released the episode this week for Halloween. And I think everyone should at least have one podcast that talks about Hocus Pocus. So go listen to the girls talk about it and talk about if it's feminist or not. And then the next one is going to be For Better or Worse, which is at FBOW Pod. All these are on Twitter, by the way, because that's the only social media I really hang out at the most. And their episode is on Labyrinth. Like, how can you not talk about Labyrinth and Halloween? And imaginary friends. I mean, it's everything all rolled into one for this entire episode. And it's also the only time I've ever been attracted to David Bowie in my entire life. And I'm not quite sure why. I think it's basically he looks like the owl in real life. And no, I'm not attracted to owls. But for some reason, this just works for me. And I think it's because when I was a preteen, for whatever reason, it really worked. I don't know. I just go with it. But the episode is great. It's funny. It's hilarious. You get to hear all about how much Labyrinth means and Jim Henson means, and I've talked to them on Twitter about it, and it's hilarious. It's a husband and wife team on this one. Generally, I listen to Friends, but I think the husband and wife really works, and especially in this one. So give them a listen too. And then there's Pouch Potatoes, which is at Pouch Pod. And they're an Aussie team. They're an Aussie group of friends who are also in the film industry. And so they've only got like 2 episodes up right now, but there was another previous podcast. But of the 2 they've got up now, I can't actually talk about the Badu. I think that's how you say it. I don't know because I don't watch horror films because Vivid Dreams. No. So I'm going to talk about their other movie that I think you should watch because it's Crocodile Dundee. As Aussies, it'd be very interesting to listen to their viewpoint, but also, I mean, it's like the unfettered satire on Halloween. Like, it's like watching, like, reverse cosplay. I don't know. It's a thing. And listen to it. And then finally, we've got Heaving Bosoms, which is a romance book podcast, and they're found at heaving_bosoms. And the episode, they have a whole bunch actually I could have chosen, but I picked How to Flirt with a Naked Werewolf because I read the book when it first came out, and it's by Molly Harper, and it's brilliantly funny. It's kind of in the line of a rom-com, but listening to them talk about it is hilarious. Listening to Aaron and Melody, it's hilarious because they just kind of bing bong boom all over the place. And it's about a rom-com with surly werewolves in Alaska, which is good because Aaron lives in Alaska. Anyway, it's hilarious. There's 2 episodes of it, so you should totally listen to it. So those are my recommendations for this episode. Listen to those 5 episodes of different podcasts that kind of feature this whole world. Okay, in a recap today, we have discussed imaginary friends, my batshit crazy memory, and reality of head. I mean, shape-shifting chicken. That's not normal. We've talked about Sven's imaginary friends. We've done research, and I've recommended like podcast episodes. Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening. Hopefully I'll be back before a month from now. I don't know. It just depends on my schedule, and Deconstructing Damsels takes a lot of my time because I have to read and then I have to review, and it takes a little bit of time to do the work. But I'm hoping you guys enjoy the Imaginary Friends episode. And please, please, go do something fun today. It's Halloween. Go do something fun. No, that doesn't include throwing eggs at houses. No, not even if they're hard-boiled or soft-boiled. It doesn't matter. No. Just, go do something fun and unexpected today because Halloween is the day for joy. That's what I've learned from my partner anyway. Here is today's lesson. If a kid has an imaginary friend, give them a pat on the back. If it's a woman, give them a really big pat on the back. Give the imaginary friend a high five. Don't sit on them. Don't step on them like my parents did. And enjoy the fact that your kid has got a creative mind. They've got an outlet that makes them happy. And they're not Sid from the Toy Story. Thanks, guys. Bye.